Why isn't hashtag the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes about the characters from hashtag the Hunger Games? I want to F. Hi, I'm Lara and this is Trip to Trilogy, and just like the girl on fire, book Twitter is up in flames. So, what exactly is the controversy? This year, Susan Collins is releasing the prequel to her Hunger Games series, which is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And it seemed like everyone was super excited until recently when it was announced who the protagonist of this story would be, which is President Cornelius Snow, the villain in the main series. Now, when I first heard this, I was actually really into it because before this, I wasn't super excited about the series. It kind of came off as a cash grab to me. Many authors, when their series is popular, all they will write is that series for the rest of their career. I'm not the biggest fan of this. However, when this was announced, I actually thought it was a good thing. While a lot of people seem to have wanted to see Finnick's game or Haymitch's game or many different characters playing through the game, we already got that story. And the one side I feel like we never got within the world was actually within the capital of Panem. And I honestly think it'll be super interesting to read from that perspective. However, book Twitter has different opinions apparently. So I just read the excerpt from the first chapter of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. My first thoughts are it was very quick and to the point, and it will be about President Snow mentoring the first victor from District 12. This excerpt is it within third person, so we aren't necessarily stuck within Snow's thoughts. So this could make it more obvious when he does things that are wrong. One thing that was interesting in the movies is we got to see what was happening in the capital while Katniss was in the game. But within the book universe, we actually never really got this. And I definitely think getting to see the behind the scenes will be interesting. A new twist on the story, but also letting us know how Panem became this way. Because from the excerpt, what I was able to get was at the time of this story, the government has created the Hunger Games, but the people of the capital actually actively try to avoid it. Probably because they think it's gross as crap and messed up. And part of Snow's goal will be getting people more invested so that he can improve his status. And this book is demonstrating how the government and the media are going to ally themselves to change the perception of the public on this specific event, which I find fascinating and I think could be really impactful. This is a dystopian, and throughout the history of dystopian books, they haven't been about perfect good guys defeating the bad guys. I know after the Hunger Games success, many YA dystopians followed suit, such as Divergent and The Maze Runner, but the truth is this isn't what a dystopian initially was. So many of these books are about characters who already know society is bad. It did make sense for Katniss to oppose the capital. She was from the have-nots, she was oppressed. However, this has led to a trend where all dystopians are from this perspective. And just to think of some of the few dystopians I know of before, 1984 is from the perspective of Winston. Winston is corrupted by the government, and even though he isn't perfectly in power or perfectly obedient, he does think things that are terrible because of the environment he's grown in. Winston ends up turning to the government. One of the last lines in the book is that he loved Big Brother. He succumbed to the government. And I think a lot of people being upset seem to miss the point of original dystopians. Dystopians are meant to explore terrible futures, not because it's a cool story where you can have an edgy setting and have main characters beat up the bad guys. They aren't meant to be black and white morality. They're meant to be an exploration of how government, politics, and power can be corrupted to abuse and use people. And I think by showing this story from the perspective of someone who is corrupted by this power, it can add depth to the world of Panem. This could be an almost better warning against societal corruption than a story from the perspective of the outsider. But I feel like a lot of the uproar is like, why would we want to read from a bad person's point of view? If anything, I think if someone finds a piece of him that they relate to or sympathize with, it could make people uncomfortable. And when people are uncomfortable, either they're gonna be mad at the book and be like, wow, book, that's dumb. They're going to brush it off as being like, oh, whatever, it's just a fictional character. Or three, the best response would be they read that, realize that just because someone has these human elements doesn't mean they can't be blatantly wrong, and maybe in turn look in on themselves. I think people can learn from this more than they can learn from a perfectly virtuous Mary Sue. Villain protagonist is a common trend throughout literature, so I don't understand why people are upset about it now. And of course, I remember remember the young elite being a big buzz because it's from a villain protagonist perspective. However, in that story, I think part of the reason why people were more lenient is one, because the story was advertised as that and she wasn't an evil person from an established world, but two is because she was the oppressed underdog. So in some way, seeing her come to power was also to an extent her getting revenge on other bad people. I think it's more of a psychological insight on how someone can become like this. I also saw some people upset because this is supposed to humanize him, but the fact of the matter is the worst people on earth are still human, and they still have human elements to them as much as you want to deny. And I don't think this in any way excuses his actions as much as understand him and how he became this way. At the end of the day, the most terrifying thing is not a monster but a human that might be very charismatic, who's really friendly, who might be doting to their family, but when you're not looking could actually be corrupt. I have noticed a couple trends. A lot of people seem to be upset at the article and how it portrays him, and it uses the word hero. But the word hero did not always mean a good guy. Hero originally meant larger than life. So many people talk about writing advice when writing villains. They believe they're the hero of their own story. Write your villain as the hero of his own story, of her own story. I think of all the possible characters that could have gotten the perspective, President Snow is the best one. Of all the dystopians I mentioned, there have been characters who are corrupt, have been bad, but I haven't seen a dystopian from the dictator's perspective, from the baddest of the bad person on top. Even Clockwork Orange, he's just one of the bad people. 1984, he's one person who gets brainwashed. But we haven't seen a dystopian from the perspective of power, from the perspective of someone manipulating the system to climb to the top. So I'm going to read some of the tweets that came out about it. I did mostly get tweets that oppose my opinion, so I could give you my thoughts on them. So the first one is, what we could have had: Haymitch's games, Mag's games, Finnick Odair's games, the first Hunger Games, Katniss and Peeta's lives with their kids, Effie backstory, literally everything post Mockingjay. What we got: Snow's backstory, URLO. To be honest, I don't know what URLO stands for, but my response to this is, it's another Hunger Games. We've read that book already. I don't think we need another one from a perspective of someone in the game. And just because a character is likable as a side character in a series doesn't mean they need their own book. And I feel like a lot of super fans have gotten to the point where they want a book for every character they love, which is fine. If an author does that and you like it, it's fine. But personally, I don't really feel like reading a book for every side character in every book I've ever read. In Catching Fire, we literally get a scene where Katniss and Peeta watch Haymitch's Hunger Games. They summarize the whole game for us, and I don't need to read the whole story if I know exactly what happens within it. And then two, Effie is a lot less interesting in the books than the movies, and this is a prequel for the books, not the movies. Effie in the books does not ever go to District 13. She doesn't help Katniss. She doesn't rebel. And I honestly, if I had to bet, I would bet that seeing about Katniss and Peeta's kids and all that stuff, personally, I'm not interested in that. I think their story is done and we should just let them have their happily ever after. I could understand writing about rebuilding a country and creating a good one from a new character's perspective. I definitely think there aren't that many books on what happens after the revolution is done and creating the new place. I think that could be potentially cool, but just because that's potentially cool, I don't think making a story about Snow is a bad idea in that context. I actually, though, now that I think about it, that is a story I've not seen before, so someone should write that, but I don't necessarily think it needs to be in the Hunger Games. But yeah, I do think it could be interesting, but I still think the story of Snow is just as interesting. The next one is, the Hunger Games prequel is about Snow. No thank you, I'll pass. I don't want to sympathize with him. But the way this is perceived, Snow is already pretty high up. It's mostly about him trying to get more power, because though he has a name because of his family within this world, it is shown that he's not particularly wealthy and he wants to gain power. So this book isn't going to be giving him some sob story to try to sympathize with him, at least that's my prediction, as much as showing how he is able to use the system to gain power. A story from the point of view of the capital is much more interesting than another story from the point of view of the district. Following a young President Snow is fascinating with the complexity of the character. I agree 100% with this tweet. I know some people want to see other districts, but I feel like getting to see the perspective from the capital is still a much more unique perspective than that of another district. I do think if they had to do another district, district, it would be from a career district. But overall, I still think the capital perspective, where they are in no ways victims, is going to be more unique. Actual footage of one of the characters who deserve to have a whole book about it. Loosen your corset, have a drink. I don't think any fictional character deserves to have a book about them because they're entertaining or likable. Being a good fictional character, like he's a good fictional character, doesn't mean he deserves it. Like, none of them are real. Snow isn't real. Hamish isn't real. They don't deserve to have a book about them. Am I the only one totally disappointed in the main character of the new Hunger Games book being Snow? Like, do we really need to humanize a ruthless dictator right now? I don't think so. I feel like there's this mentality that if there's a villain with a human element or a humanizing element that's trying to bring you over to his side or excuse his actions, I prefer books that are like, yeah, just because someone has something humanizing doesn't mean they're good. Or bad guys aren't always obviously every single bad trait in the world, and they can have characteristics that people find charming that can trick them into supporting them. I don't think this book is gonna result in people reading it and being like, oh, that was right all along. I guess forcing kids to kill each other is a-okay. Definitely don't think it's her intention. And even if the book's poorly done, I don't think anyone will lack that much common sense to think that. I'm not worried about this book having a negative effect on people besides people not liking it or being upset by it. I don't think anyone's gonna be like, oh, Snow was right. It was okay. I am surprised and angry and devastated and yes, immensely disappointed. Removes hashtag the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes from my Goodreads. Abso-effing-lutely not. You do not have to read this book. You do not have to want to read it. You can feel angry, but personally to me, I think being extremely angry or disappointed at a book you have not read yet isn't necessarily the most well thought out reason to be angry. You can be angry, but the truth is, I think if you read the book and you think it's terribly done, being angry at it is perfectly reasonable. But I think that hearing a book has a villain protagonist doesn't mean that it's promoting villainous actions. If anything, it could be a better way to show the horrors of it than if you had done it from the perspective of a hero. To be honest, when I read The Hunger Games, I wasn't super into Snow. I felt like he was more interesting in the movie. However, this could make him even more terrifying in the books. In deciding which character would get the prequel, Cons did the three-finger salute and said, may the odds be ever in your favor, and then pulled out Snow's name. Disappointed face. I don't think this was random. I think this was deliberate. I think Snow is the best protagonist that she could have picked for the sake of making it a unique story, especially within the context of dystopian. I cannot think of a dystopian book from the dictator's perspective and showing his rise of power. I've honestly only really seen dystopians from lower bad people's perspectives or a hero who's revolting against its perspective. We never really get the baddest person. While watching True Blood and tweeting, because that's what you do, just catching up on hashtag Bull S of the day, and just read about the hashtag Hunger Games new book. President Snow, really? Ugh, I wanted either someone completely new or Mags. What about Mags? I think someone completely new could have been interesting, but honestly, I don't think Mags would have brought something new to the table. She is just another Hunger Games contestant, and we already got that book twice. No, we don't need a hashtag the Hunger Games prequel, humanizing the villain. Hashtag Star Wars already went there, and that didn't really turn out great, did it? The Star Wars prequels weren't well done. However, it isn't because Anakin is a bad person, it's because they just were not well written. Maybe it will turn out terrible and be like George Lucas, but there have also been stories where they just take a random character from a series and write a whole new book about them. Like, have you seen Fantastic Beasts? They just take a new character and it didn't make the series good. I don't think it necessarily has to do with which character she chose, but whether or not she has the skill level to pull it off. Never have I ever said, I wonder what President Snow was like when he was young. Where is Effie Trinket's origin story, or the story of young Hamish Abernathy's fall into alcoholism when he realized he'd survived one prison for another? Why? Hashtag the Hunger Games. So I definitely don't want to read about Cornelius's day-to-day life as a teen. I want to read a rise to power, so I hope this is it. But if it is like, oh, this is his life when he was a teen, yeah, that would be dumb. Whereas with Hamish, I do actually think that this tweet specified his fall to alcoholism and the being trapped as the person training the tributes only for them to die year after year. I do think that would be an interesting story. A story of someone who thinks they found freedom only to be trapped into another perpetual prison is reflected in other stories. In the story All Quiet on the Western Front, about a soldier trapped in a war where he's forced to fight and see his friends die day after day, and seeing how PTSD overcomes him and the loss of hope. I think that story actually reflects it too. So if you want to read a story like that, I would recommend one. However, I do think that just because it's been told before doesn't mean it can't be told again. I definitely think all stories can be told as many times as people want. However, I do think honestly that book would probably be way more depressing than what is planned, so I definitely think that book would be hard to get through, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be told. I do think if they were going to tell a story, that probably would be another unique take, but I don't think Hamish's story potentially being good discounts Snow's story potentially being good. And finally, President Snow prequel. Do we need more than corrupt politician got to the top through corrupt politician stuff? Why not expand on other districts? Show what they were doing. Know of their movements. Haymitch would be more interesting. So I've noticed that a lot of people are super into Haymitch, which I get that, but personally, I am not into the idea of, oh, this character's likable, give them their own book because people like them. I do see some potential in the Haymitch story, not his games though, because they're literally summarized within Catching Fire. However, at the end of the day, if the story that Susan Collins wants to tell is Snow's, then it probably would be better written because that's what she's passionate about. I honestly can't think of a book about a corrupt politician rising through power through corrupt politics that's fiction and YA, so I don't understand why they're saying more. Is there one that I didn't see? If you can think of one, let me know below. Anyway, those are just my thoughts. I do think that all those tweets are fine if people disagree with it. However, I would love to hear what your thoughts. Do you agree or disagree with me? Tell them all down below. It's okay to disagree, and I will gladly discuss all these topics with you. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.